Hey, thanks again, Declan. Okay, so it's me for law as well as international. Okay, I think I'm seeing more or less the same group of faces. So I'll skip the introduction, but if anyone wants to hang on at the end, I can reintroduce myself. So on law, so again, law we cover off in four modules. Okay. And I suppose the meatiest of the modules is actually module one because it covers off two very key parts of law. The first one is it basically covers off an introduction to the Irish legal system. Okay. That's the first thing we cover up. That's half of module one. Okay. So law, I suppose if it's again to go back to where I was at the beginning of the international module, if you stop somebody on the street and you said, okay, where do our laws come from? They would probably say it comes from the politicians in Dáil Éireann who come up with laws and get them signed off. Okay. And yeah, I mean, so what they do is they get voted on in the Dáil. They then go to the Seanad, and then ultimately, they all going well, they will get signed off by the president. Okay, so yeah, that is where some of our laws come from, but not all of it. Okay, there are a couple of other areas where our laws come from, and they will be covered off in module one. So I mean, for example, our laws do come from, to a certain extent, previous decisions. Okay, so a set of facts is put in front of a judge will make a ruling on it and say, okay, I rule in favor of the plaintiff, which is the person who took the case, or I rule in favor of the defendant, which is the person defending themselves in the case. And then if the same facts come up again a year later, unless there's a good reason for the different judge to deviate from their first ruling, they will probably follow the same way. Okay, so judges will tend to that is what is known as traditional precedent. Okay, where one court will follow the other unless they significantly disagree, or unless the facts are particularly different in one case versus another. But that is where another part of our laws come from. The third place that our laws come from is the Constitution. Okay, and that is topical at the moment because we're due to go to the polls in I think it's about 3 weeks' time to have a couple of referenda. Okay, so anything that is in the Constitution can only be changed by means of a referendum. Okay, if one more person votes to change, votes yes in the referendum than votes no, then a change will be made to the Constitution. If it's the reverse, the Constitution will remain the same. Okay, so that is the only way to change the Constitution is by means of a referendum. Okay. And then the last place that we get some of our laws from is the EU. Okay, so European Union. Okay, so European Union will dictate. I'll cover that more off in module three, because that is what we cover off in module three. But the European Union drives a lot of our laws as well. Okay, which is one of the reasons for being part of it. Okay. So we cover off the source of Irish law. So where does the law come from? We will cover off, what else do we cover off? We cover off the breakdown of the Irish legal system. Okay, so we will take you through the different courts. So if you watch the news, you will frequently see at least once a week you will see mention of legal cases. A lot of them are criminal cases, yes, but some of them are civil. Okay, which means there is no actual criminal in them. There is a plaintiff and there is a defendant, but there is a disagreement on maybe employment law. You will certainly see that from time to time on the news. It may be kind of some form of kind of business arrangement whereby one company is maybe contracted to do something for another company, and in the eyes of one party they have failed to do it. There are things what is known as tort, which is the fourth and final module that we're going to be covering off, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is basically accidents or where things go wrong. So you will see that on the news. But there is criminal, but there is also civil. Okay, and there are key differences in them. Okay, in criminal law, the defendant has to be found guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Otherwise, the defendant it will walk free. Okay, but in civil cases, the balance might be a lot more razor tight. Okay, the judge might say, I'm 51-49 in favor of one side or the other. So they might say, well, it's very, very tight, but this is my ruling and this is what has swayed it. Okay. But I mean, those are, and obviously in civil cases, people, in criminal cases, sending someone to prison is an option for the judge, depending on the severity of the case. In the civil system, it tends to be more damages or injunctions or things like that are used. as mechanisms for enforcement. Okay, obviously, if somebody has not broken, they may have broken a law, but if they've not broken a criminal law, they're not going to be sent to prison. Okay. And we'll also take you through kind of more general things like what is a solicitor, what is a barrister. Okay, barristers tend to deal with the courts, solicitors tend to deal with the clients, and then the solicitor and barrister, I suppose, interact with each other. But an introduction to the Irish legal system is the first part of Module 1 that we're going to cover off. Okay. All right, so unless there's any questions, I'll take you into the second part of Module 1. And this is an important piece because not only is it a very likely exam question, it is also what your first assignment is going to be on, and that is contract law, okay? So contract, I mean, again, if you rely on the movies, contracts tend to involve kind of a signature at the bottom of a bit of paper with hundreds of terms and conditions, which sometimes can lead to trouble for the person who signed it. Yeah, that is one way of forming a contract, but it's not the only one. There's essentially 4 things that are needed. I mean, you complete a contract every time you buy something in a shop, okay? So there are 4 elements to a contract, which I'll just briefly take you through. There is the offer, okay? So let's say I put an ad up on DoneDeal and I say I'm going to sell my car for 10,000, okay? That is an offer, okay? I'm offering to sell my car for 10,000 euro, okay? And then somebody responds to the offer and says, yes, okay, I will buy your car for 10,000 euro. That is what is known as acceptance. Okay, so you put the offer forward, or it doesn't need to be on DoneDeal. I mean, you can offer to your friend. So, do you want to buy my car for 10,000? Your friend says, yes, I will buy your car for 10,000, and you shake on it, or you exchange emails or something like that. There is a form of acceptance there. Okay, so offer is the first thing required for a contract. Acceptance is the second. Okay. Third thing you need for a contract is what is known as consideration, okay? If there's no consideration, it is basically a gift, okay? Consideration is usually money, okay? In the example that I've just given, the consideration is the 10,000 euro, okay? If I'm saying, do you want my car? And my friend says, yes, I'd love your car, and there's no arrangement for any money to change hands, I'm basically just giving a gift, okay? Which is important. The distinction is important because if I give it as a gift, I can potentially ask for it back. Okay, if I sell it for 10,000 and the 10,000 reaches my bank account, that car now belongs to my friend. Okay, it doesn't belong to me anymore. So if I then say, oh no, I've changed my mind, it's now worth, I think it's now worth 20. I've gone and researched it. It's now worth 20,000. So I want to have it back so I can get 20,000 instead of 10. Your friend is perfectly entitled to say, no, we've had a contract. I've done my part of it. You've done your part. We have a contract. We walk away. Okay. So consideration, 10,000, usually money, not always, but usually money is a third thing that is required for a contract to be valid, okay? And then the last thing is intention to create legal relations, okay? If I put an ad up on DoneDeal, or maybe if I go even further, say I put out an offer to tender for something and, people come and they apply and they do a lot of work for it. That would suggest what is known as intention to create legal relations, okay? So that is the fourth and final thing required in a contract, okay? So if I'm exchanging emails, if I'm making multiple phone calls, so I have discussions and meetings about something, that shows a strong suggestion that I am intending to create legal relations, that I'm serious about a contract being formed, okay? If down the pub after a load of drinks around midnight, I jokingly say to my friend, do you want to buy my car for 10,000? And my friend has also had a load of drinks, and we maybe agree on it, but then the morning after we say, oh, cheapers, 10,000 is a bit cheap. Maybe I shouldn't, and I need my car for work. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. The fact that it's in a pub on a Saturday night makes it less likely that there's a genuine, serious intent to create legal relations. Okay, so the 4 things required for contract: offer, need to offer, do you want to buy my car? Acceptance, somebody comes back and says, yes, I'll confirm in writing that I would like to buy your car. Third thing, consideration, what are we going to sell my car for? It's going to be 10,000, that is the consideration. And is there an intention to create legal relations? If there's a flurry of emails back and forth, everything in writing, everything carefully documented, that does suggest intention to create legal relations. If it's a chat down the pub with your mates after a load of beers, there is less likelihood that you intend to create legal relations in that scenario. Okay, so that is contract law, all of which is in Module 1, and your first assignment will be on contract law.
Okay.
should you choose to accept it. Okay. So that's all in module one. Module one is probably the meatiest of it. Okay, I think I'm not sure if it's the longest, but there's certainly a lot in there. Okay, but it is, you know, the introduction part. You know, it is important to know how the Irish legal system works before we go into the individual elements of law. Okay. Now the second thing we cover off, which is in module two, is company law. Okay. So there's a number of different things we cover off here. We will start by taking you through what are the sources of company law. And the main source of company law are statutes, okay? So going back to what I was saying earlier, these are scenarios where politicians, not ones that are currently in office, excuse me, but ones that were in office in the past, have created statutes, so actual acts, known as the Companies Acts, and I've developed the Companies Acts and said, okay, this is the way we want company law in Ireland to run, okay? And one of the key things to say in relation to that, I mean, if you go back I suppose maybe 30 years or so, there was a lot of people, there were lots of people who were setting up companies basically as a means of paying less tax. And as a result, there was a cleanup. This was beginning to damage Ireland's reputation as a safe place to invest, okay? Because if you're investing in someone or some company, you know, you do want to have very clear understanding as to what what is their turnover, what is their profit margin, things like that. It was damaging Ireland's reputation. That so there was a big cleanup done, I think, in the early 90s, whereby a lot of these kind of shell companies were closed down because they were only operating. They wouldn't actually do anything. They were only operating as a means of paying lower tax. So there was a big cleanup that was done back then. So coming with that cleanup were requirements to file certain returns. Okay, so if you're a small company, you need to file a certain amount of paperwork every year, which is then accessible to, among other people working in the credit and collections business. Okay, which is can be very useful to people like you guys. You know, there are requirements to file certain returns. If you're a medium-sized company, those requirements go up. And then if you're a very, very large company, you know, the likes of kind of maybe Microsoft or Google, the requirements are significantly more, okay? And the whole reason for these requirements existing is that if people are going to invest in the company or are going to effectively lend money to the company, they need to establish the level of risk that they are taking. And the way one of the ways they can do that is by looking at the company's books, okay? So we're going to take you through all that in module two. We're going to explain to you what the company's registration office is, which is where you go if you want to set up a company and what the requirements are there. Okay, and all of this is very, very useful because if you're a creditor and you're unable to make contact with your company, or if they're taking an awful long time in terms of making payment, you know, you can request some of these details. Okay, and they have to provide them, okay? If they're not up to date with their paperwork or they can't provide you with the paperwork, you can file a complaint, okay? And that will make life very uncomfortable for the company who are now delinquent on your books, okay? So this is a powerful tool that you can use as a creditor, okay? So we're going to take you through all of that. We're also going to take you through some of the legal avenues you can go through if things go very, very wrong, okay? So we'll take you through what liquidation is, okay? We may have covered, if you did the credit management course previously, you know, some of that would have been covered here, but this is looking at it from the legal angle, okay? So we're going to take you through some of the priority of debts and things like that when a company is liquidated. We're going to take you through examinership, okay, where the fundamental idea of examinership is to allow a company to survive long enough to trade its way out of trouble. And we're also going to take you through receivership, okay? So all of that is covered in module two. And then the final thing that we cover off in module two is what is known as the Consumer Credit Act, okay? So this is the rules regarding the lending of money, okay? So again, I mean, depending on the type of business that you're in, that can be very key. You may notice, I mean, the best examples of this is if you listen to the radio or if you watch TV, you will hear if a bank is on and they're offering to lend you money and they're saying, we have a credit card and the APR on the credit card is this, there is a lot of little bit of, you know, the voice will be lowered, this is a subsidiary of such and such a bank and the rules of this are such that you may lose your home if you don't keep up your repayments. You know, it's kind of rattled through fairly quickly on the radio. That is all to remain compliant with the Consumer Credit Act, okay? All of the terms and conditions. You can't lend 10,000 to somebody without kind of saying, oh, by the way, it's going to cost you 12,000 ultimately to pay this back. Okay, which is the way it normally works. Okay, if it's on TV, you tend to see the writing tends to be in white, and it's almost at times it's almost indistinguishable from what it is behind it. But there is a lot of writing that'll appear whenever a financial product is being offered for sale on TV, okay? And that is all to comply with the Consumer Credit Act. So we will take you through the Consumer Credit Act, all the rules of lending money, because what you can't do if it's going to cost the customer any more, you have to tell them up front, okay? It can't be a surprise to the customer, oh, jeepers, this cost me twice as much as if I'd had my 10,000 up front. That's okay. That's okay. It can cost twice as much, but they need to know about it. They need to know about it up front, okay? So all of that is covered in module 2. How am I doing for time? I got about 20 minutes, so I'm good. Any questions on any of that? So company law, module 2.
No, all good.
Super. Thanks very much. So the third module, I mentioned EU law earlier, and I said we come back to it. So now is the time to do that. So the third module, there's a smaller section that we have at the beginning of module 3, which is a follow-on from contract law. So it covers things like the sale of goods, some imports and exports, but the main topic that we cover off in module 3 is EU law. Okay, so European Union law. Okay, so Ireland is a member of the European Union. So there are certain fundamental principles of the European Union that we have to abide by legally. Okay. And these are covered by a variety of treaties that have been signed from the 1950s onwards, that have set up the European institutions and have set up the way that the European Union works. So the fundamental principles of European law are free movement of goods. Okay, so if you are looking to sell your products, if you have a product you're looking to sell it into France, I suppose tying back to the international credit management, it should be more or less as straightforward to sell it into France as it is to sell it from Dublin to Galway. Okay, it shouldn't be. There should be free movement of goods. There shouldn't be significant kind of penalties or problems that stop the free movement of goods. Okay, so goods should be able to move freely throughout the EU. Okay, there is free movement of workers. Okay, so if I decide, right, Dublin's getting too expensive, I want to go to and work in maybe a small town in France because the weather is better and it's going to be cheaper cost of living, I should be allowed to do that in the same way that if I want to up sticks, leave Dublin and move to Galway, I can do it fairly freely. Okay, there shouldn't be significant problems that arise. You know, if you want, you can't do that to the US. You can't suddenly decide I'm moving to the US. Okay, it's not as straightforward as that. It should be as straightforward within the European Union. Okay, so free movement of workers is the second one. Okay, right of establishment. Okay, so if you're self-employed, you want to do the same. You want to up sticks and you want to kind of sell whatever it is you're doing as a self-employed person. If you want to do it in a different country in the European Union, you should be free to do that. There should be free movement of services. Okay, so again, if you're a self-employed craftsperson or something like that, if you're a solicitor, if you happen to have expertise in the French legal system because maybe you studied there when you were in college or you've done some work there afterwards, you can potentially do that. And there's also the free movement of capital. Okay, so money and things like that should be able to move fairly freely around the European Union. So those are the fundamental principles of the European Union, and they are all captured in the various treaties that have put the European Union together over the last we're talking about the guts of 70 years now at this stage. Okay, so we're going to take you through all that. We're going to take you through the community institutions. Okay, so how does the European community work? There's a number of institutions there. There is the Commission. Okay, so each country appoints a commission, and the purpose of a commission, I suppose, ultimately is probably, they provide a lot of the strategic direction for the European Union. Okay, they are known as the guardians of the treaty. Okay, so the treaties say this is the way we want the Europe to work. To give it its nickname, we want Europe to work in this manner. It is the commissioners whose job it is to strategically drive that in the manner in which the treaties designed. There are the Council of Ministers. Okay, so the countries will have ministers that meet twice a year. Okay, and they are looking after the interests of their national government. Okay, so their interests will be more national rather than European. Okay, so they meet twice a year and they will represent their own country's interests. Okay, so the Council of Ministers is the second institution that exists. There is the European Parliament, okay, which exists and operates in a, I suppose, a not dissimilar way to our own parliament, except it's an awful lot bigger. Okay, and again, that's topical because we are electing. Ireland has 13 seats. Okay, in that very large parliament, which is it's over 500 people, I think. But Ireland has 13 of those seats. Okay, which is due to the fact that we're one of the smaller countries. But who will occupy those 13 seats will be decided in elections in May. Okay. So and they represent the those parliamentarians. Their role is to represent us back home. Okay. And then finally, there is the European Court of Justice. Okay, so you will hear frequently if there are people on the steps of maybe the High Court saying that they are unhappy with the result of something. They may say, "I'm going to take this all the way to Europe," which in theory they can, but in the types of cases that will be heard in the European Courts of Justice tend to be European cases. So you are saying, okay, one of the rules, one of the laws that exists for me as a European citizen has been broken. So, for instance, I don't have free movement of goods, or I'm not being allowed to move freely. As a result, I'm taking a case to Europe. So you can do that, but it needs to be linked to some form of European law. Okay. So those are the institutions that we're going to cover off. And then finally, the last thing we're going to cover off is the sources of European law. So I've mentioned a couple of times the treaties play a big part as to how Europe is run. Okay, so various treaties, probably about 7, 8, somewhere between 8 and 10 of them that have been signed over the years. Gone quiet on that front. We haven't, when I was younger, we used to hear about them every couple of years. Be a referendum about it, but so we've gone through the kind of Maastricht Treaty, the Nice Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty. But things have gone quiet on that front, so we're not being asked to vote on stuff in any way recently. But anyway, they're known as the primary sources of law. Okay, so the treaties dictate that, but it is alive. It's not just treaties that are there sitting gathering dust. Okay, it is the European Parliament. There's reports on the news from the European Parliament pretty much every week. It is a live operating function of government. Okay, so from there you will get regulations, okay, which say, right, from now on this is the way Europeans are going to act. There are directives, directives are different to regulations. What they might say is they might, a good example be greenhouse gases. They might say, right, we want to cut greenhouse gases by 25% in over 10 years, but we will leave it up to the countries as to how they do it. Okay, do you want to do it by reducing your emissions through cars, through agriculture, through large industry? What way you want to do it? We'll leave it up to you, but you need to cut your greenhouse gases by 25% in 10 years. Okay, that's known as a directive, and they will come from Europe. Okay, and then there's another couple of ones which are non-binding. There's decisions, there's recommendations and opinions, whereby it is recommended that this will happen, or is recommended. I suppose a good example of that, if my understanding is correct, for quite some time there was a lot of recommendation that Ireland would increase its corporate tax rate. Okay, it was non-binding, and they weren't necessarily forced into it. That came from elsewhere in the end. But it was a recommendation was made that they would do that. Okay, so non-binding, didn't have to do it, but pressure was, I suppose, applied, and that's an example that can be replicated across other countries. So that is all in module 3, European or EU law. Any questions on that? Okay. So lastly, the fourth and final module is what is known as tort. Okay, which personally is my favorite of the cases the type of law that I studied when I was in college. Because the case law is brilliant in it, but it is mainly driven by case law, and it is to do with wrongs. A tort means a wrong, okay, so it's different to contract. In a contract, you agree to do something, and if you're the injured party in a contract, you probably had some dealings in the past with the plaintiff. Okay, you've gone into business, you've come to some arrangement, and that arrangement has gone sour. In a tort, that's not necessarily the case. Okay, you might have been hit by a car. Okay, you never met the person who drove the car before, but unfortunately you now have a relationship, shall we say, because they have now hit you with the car and you've been injured. Okay, so there's 4 things similar to contract. There's 4 things needed in contract. There's 4 things needed to prove a tort, to prove that something's gone wrong. First one is you need to prove a duty of care. Okay, so back when we used to do this course in the lecture theatres, what I used to use as an example was I'd have a laptop in front of me. Say I start randomly throwing the laptop around. Okay, I have a duty of care to you all. Okay, because you're sitting quite close to me. Okay, they were small little lecture theatres. You're sitting quite close to me. I have a duty of care not to do anything that's going to injure you when you're sitting nearby me. Okay, so duty of care is the first thing. Second thing is you need to prove a breach of that duty. So say I close up the laptop and then fling it across the room. There's a danger I'm going to hit somebody. Okay, so that would represent a breach of the duty of care. Okay, I have less of a duty to you guys now because you guys are on Zoom. If I throw the laptop around, I'm not going to hit you. Okay, but when you're 10 feet away from me, if I start throwing the laptop around, that is an example of a breach of my duty. Okay. Third thing you need is damage. Okay, if I fling the laptop around but I don't hit anybody, I'm in less trouble than if I do. Okay, if I hit somebody, it causes a gash on their forehead. That is damage. They can say, okay, had you not thrown that laptop around, I would not have had that gash on my head. Okay, so that is an example of damage. And then the fourth thing is there needs to be a relationship, causal relationship between the two. Okay. If you injure yourself, but you don't injure yourself, but your injuries have nothing to do with me throwing the laptop around, the chance of you suing me successfully are reduced. They may not be gone completely because maybe you got trampled on leaving the lecture theatre because some lunatic was throwing a laptop around. Maybe that's your injury. But if your injury is maybe an hour later or something, and you try to sue me, you say, well, that wouldn't have happened had you not thrown the laptop around. There needs to be a link between the two. Okay, so a duty of care. Okay, so that would mean we all have a duty of care to be careful when we're around other people. A breach of that duty. Okay, and the way you test that is it something a reasonable person would or would not do? Third thing, there needs to be damage. Okay, no damage, less likely of a successful case. And then finally, there needs to be a link between the two. Okay, you can't say 10 years later I had a heart attack, and I'm blaming that heart attack on you throwing the laptop around. You could well say, well, it's very unlikely that your heart attack was caused by me throwing the laptop around 10 years ago. Okay. All right, so that is stuff we're going to cover off in module 4. And that forms the basis for a couple of other topics that we're going to cover off in module 4. First thing we're going to cover off after that is what is known as occupier's liability. So what are my duty if I invite you into my house? Okay, what is my duty of care to you? Okay, if I don't invite you into my house, but you just walk in, what sort of duty of care do I have to you then? And then finally, if you break into my house, so I actually lock the doors, close the windows, and you still get into my house, what sort of duties do I have there? And the best cases of those are actually fields that might belong to farmers. Okay, so there are fields where there might be a sign outside saying, "Come on, this is we'd like to welcome you to the wild Wicklow Way," or something like that, and please walk through my field and so on. There'll be one type of duty there. If the farmer doesn't lock the gate but doesn't exactly encourage people to walk in their field, a different type of duty will be in place. And then if the farmer has put barbed wire all around the field, locked every gate, filled it with dangerous bulls to try to discourage you from going into it, and you still go in, there is a different type of duty that is owed there. Okay, so that is known as occupier's liability, and that is covered off in module 4. We also cover off employment liability. Okay, employer's liability rather. Okay, so what are your duties to your employees when they work with you? And then finally, the last one, which is also your second assignment, is what is known as professional negligence. Okay, so professional negligence deals with it deals with tort. Okay, so again, you have the same basic requirements, a duty of care, breach of duty, damage, and a causal relationship between the two, but it goes further. Okay, so in terms of proving the duty of care and also the breach, it goes a bit further. So it covers things like doctors, dentists, solicitors, financial advisors, people who give you advice. Okay, so they give you advice, the advice is wrong, you rely on the advice, and you suffer damage as a result. You can potentially, if you can prove certain things, you can potentially sue the person who gave you that advice. And where that becomes relevant in the credit world is is in the area of references. Okay, so if you get trade references or you get credit references, you go to a bank and say, okay, do you think I'm safe in lending 10,000 to this person? And the bank says yes, but they've made a mistake and they didn't check their figures correctly and they get it wrong and you lose your 10,000. Can you potentially sue the bank to get your 10,000 back? You possibly can. You will have a bit of work to do in terms of proving that they are at fault, but you potentially can. So that is known as professional negligence, and it is covered off in module 4. And that basically brings us to the end. So I think Declan would have said we have a little bit more time than we did on the first one, but I think Declan would have called out to you that I mean, the way it works is we have 4 short tests, okay, which are multiple choice, okay, or predominantly multiple choice, not only, but predominantly multiple choice. So there's 4 of those that you'll be doing throughout the next few weeks. There are 2 assignments as well. One is on contract law and the other is on tort, specifically negligent misstatements, which comes under professional liability. Professional negligence. And then there are also workbooks that we're going to send you out. You don't need to return the workbooks, okay? You can if you really want to, but you don't need to return the workbooks. But what the workbook does is it acts as a guide. Law is complex and usually you don't get everything in first go, okay? But the workbooks are designed to help you see if you're following. If you're able to answer the question in the workbook, then the information has gone in. If you're struggling to answer the question, then you probably need to reread it until you're able to successfully answer the question. Okay. And I'm obviously available if you still reread it and you're still stuck, then obviously that's where you might want to drop me an email and say, okay, can we maybe have a chat about negligent misstatements or contract law or something because I'm just not getting it. Okay.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and sometimes in law as well, there are 2 similar cases, and when you read them the first time, you think, yeah, they're identical, and yet the judgments went the opposite way in both, and it's about understanding the nuances and what was present there that was absent here that changed the justice. I must say I find it a fascinating topic. I really do, and I think by having an understanding of it from a credit perspective, it just gives you a bit of confidence. And look, I know it's a short course. You're not going to have all the answers. But what I say to people is, having completed the module, we may give you some questions, that you'll be able to say, oh, I wonder, is there a contract here? Or I wonder what this is. So you won't have all the answers, and nobody has all the answers. Like the law is the only thing in the world that has a 50% failure rate. So if you think about it, of every case that is ever taken, one guy says we have a case, the other guy says I'm defending this case because you don't have a case, and half of them get it wrong, because it's one of these things that nothing is simple. But I think by getting into their heads and seeing how they think and how the process works, to me it is fascinating. If you're working in an Irish environment, yes, it is relevant. If you're working in an international module or you're not based in Ireland, then maybe the international. But look, guys, make up your own minds based on what you've seen and heard. Decide which module is best for you, and let me know by the end of next week, and we'll get you going. So what I will now do is I will stop that recording.